This is Podcast Theory.
Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Podcast Theory. I am your host, Jason Sircone, and today it is part 5 of our 5-part series of things your podcast does not need. Now, before we get started with today's episode, I have a little bit of housekeeping for you. Just kidding. Go back and listen to part 3, and you'll understand why that's a joke that I'm trying to get over right now. Today is not exactly about efficiency, but it is about your listener experience. And it's not really even about attention span. It's I guess to some degree it could fall into that attention span category, but this is something that I feel very passionate about because when it comes to podcast production and podcast publication and getting it in front of people, you only have one chance to make a first impression. And you want that content to really jump, and you want it to grab somebody's attention. You want them to feel captivated. You want to give them everything they showed up for. Now, if your podcast features guests, you want to make sure that that guest aligns with the content that you're creating because you want that experience to be good for you. You want it to be good for your guest, but you want it to be good for your audience when they tune in. So when they listen to your content, they're feeling the impact. They're getting moved slightly further away from A, which may be a pain point, to B, which is that pleasure point. And your guest is going to help you do that if they're right for your show and if they collaborate with you with value in mind. So if you haven't listened to the previous 4 episodes in this series, I highly encourage you to do so after you take in my message today. Jump back in the archives, check out the video versions on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. They're all waiting for you. But the 5th thing your podcast does not need is for you to compromise your standards and feature a guest that does not live up to the quality that you're trying to bring your audience. Now, bringing a guest onto your show, you may not know that on the front end. You may see a guest make an appearance on another show. You may have somebody reach out to you through a pitch, or maybe they have an agency representing them and they reach out to you. Whatever gets you to that point where you decide this person seems like a great fit for my show, the criteria is going to help you make that decision. But what really matters is the level of engagement that takes place when the conversation takes place that makes up that episode. And if that's not there, that's where things can go off the rails. But where a lot of podcasters make the mistake is they still air that episode despite it not living up to their quality standards, to their overall expectations, to their overall level of happiness. And a lot of reasons for that fall into lack of planning, meaning I got to get an episode together. We're going to whip this thing out there. Whatever happens because I got to get my episode out there because I got to stay consistent, right? This is where mindset can come into play. And again, if your mindset is consistency, that's great. But you have to think about the quality of your content and how it impacts your audience. Because if you are consistently bringing crap to your audience, they are going to catch on and eventually they're going to bail. There's no exact moment to say this is when it's going to happen. But if you are constantly bringing them a certain level that they are expecting each and every time, and then it starts to diminish and it starts to drop off and you're featuring content that people won't like, they're going to bail. They're going to go find another podcast to listen to that does satiate their needs. If you've got them into your orbit and they have you in their listening rotation, you want to do everything you possibly can to keep them there. Now, the biggest example I can think of is a person that comes onto your podcast and goes into sales mode. The only reason they showed up was to peddle their course or to hawk their book or to get people aware of what they're doing and why they need to buy it today and why they are the greatest thing since sliced bread. The thing that boggles my mind is that no one that does that seems to understand what listener experience is all about, and they never put themselves in their listener's shoes. I am willing to bet everything I own that they don't like experiencing that when they listen to content, whether it be podcasts or videos or watching television or consuming a documentary, whatever. They're not thinking about constantly being bombarded with advertisements and why they need to buy something from someone. Yet they'll go on a podcast and they'll just sell from start to finish. And it puts the podcaster in a very awkward spot because they now have to determine whether this content works for their audience. And I know a lot of podcasters who are very disciplined, and they know if someone comes on and is not bringing the goods in a way that's valuable, not bringing the goods in regards to here's my sales pitch for 30 minutes, but if they're not bringing the goods to the show and bringing value that the audience is going to feel that impact from, more than likely that podcasters are going to say, well, I can't air this because my audience does not tune in for infomercials. My audience shows up because we have engaging conversations that impact their life and honestly bring a transformation to their world, even if it's minute, even if it's just a small 1% change. That's still a change. That's still a shift. And if you've got a guest that isn't going to do that because they just went into sales mode, it is up to you as a podcaster to say, you know what? My audience is not going to be served by listening to this content, because you run the risk of losing them, because it could only be one episode that makes a listener say, man, if this is tuning into a nonstop sales pitch, if all I'm going to get from this is an infomercial, I'm out. Or if someone discovers that episode as the first episode that they've ever taken in of your podcast, they are immediately going to make a snap judgment that all of your content is like that. We love to buy things, but we hate to be sold to, right? You've probably heard that before. If someone's going to come onto your podcast and do that, you have to do your part to nip it in the bud and try to get them into a value proposition mode first and get them out of that sales mode altogether. Now, you can do this by setting clear expectations on the front end of what you want to happen. This is what we're going to talk about. These are the areas of your expertise that I would really like to tap into. You're going to get an opportunity to tell your story. You're going to get an opportunity to give my audience a call to action, so they will come follow you. They will check out what you have to offer. If you have a giveaway that you'd like to present, you're going to get your opportunity to do that. But in no way, shape, or form are you going to spend our time together selling your book, selling your course, selling your product, selling your service. That's not what this is for. You have to think of that listener experience first. And as a podcast producer, as a podcast host, as you're communicating with your potential guest, it is up to you to set those expectations. Now, even if you do set those expectations very clearly and your guest still shows up and goes into sales mode, throw that episode on the editing room floor and don't look back, and don't feel ashamed in doing so. Many podcasters feel because that guest gave up their time to be on the show that they have to air it, not thinking about the long-term ramifications that episode that isn't at the same level of quality as all the others is going to do for their growth. It could potentially stunt everything. You don't want to run that risk. If you have a guest that's in sales mode, you've done your part to set the expectations. You can do your part to get them out of that. You can even stop in the middle of it and say, listen, this is not going the way I want. I would like for us to get our focus more on the value that you bring, the stories that you have to tell, and I'll give you an opportunity at the end to sell what you have to offer. If they still stay in that mode, well, then again, you have that decision to make, but it's your show. You should never feel bad about not airing something that could potentially damage your reputation and damage your overall production. Podcasting is not for selling. And this is the thing that blows my mind, because this is not that difficult to comprehend, yet many people still can't comprehend it. Podcasts are the best stage to sell without selling. When you make a guest appearance or you even produce your own show, when you are presenting your story and talking to your audience or talking with your guest and having those meaningful connections where you're collaborating on a high level, you have an opportunity to present yourself as a thought leader, and you can showcase to the audience why you are a very sought out expert. I hate the word guru. We won't use that, but expert or authority in your space. In doing that, that's going to tell the listener, this is a person that brings immense value to the world. And over the past 30 to 40 minutes that I've been consuming their message, I felt something profound happen within inside me. I want to take the next step. So I'm staying till the end. What's their call to action? Oh, they've got a free ebook. They've got a free video series. They've got XYZ. Great. How do I get that? Oh, there's my one link. Hopefully your guest is only giving one call to action to keep things clear. That's a story for another day. But as the listener, if I'm impacted because that guest had something very profound to say, they had great stories, they had great delivery, they had great presence, I'm going to follow what they tell me to do. Now, as the host, I'm already invested in you because I'm listening to your show. If it's the first time I'm listening and I'm invested in what you have to say, I'm subscribing to your podcast. I'm getting on your email list. There's a lot of things I'm going to do to stay in your orbit as well. These are all things that can happen psychologically in the mind of a listener. As they tune in, they want the best. They ultimately want what they showed up for, which has been a running theme in this 5-part series that I put together. I want to be satiated when I click play. If I click play, it's because you gave me a reason to do so. If I don't get what you gave or what you told me you were going to give me, I'm probably going to bail and I'm going to go find somebody else that will. It's as clear as that. So if you are running the risk of bringing on a guest or publishing the episode of a guest that doesn't live up to your quality standards, that you know is going to piss off your audience or potentially scare away new listeners, it is your responsibility to not air that content and instead maybe just do a solo episode. Maybe start off that solo episode and give an explanation as to why you're not going to have that conversation that you advertised. Maybe you play a rerun. Radio stations that do talk radio, I don't know if they still do this. I remember this from Frasier. If he wasn't on the air, they'd pull from the archives. The best of Crane, they called it. Now, they may still do that on talk radio. I'm not 100% sure, but there's no reason why you can't pull content from your past podcast episodes and let your audience know why you are resharing that content, because you've got valuable assets in your catalog. Get beyond thinking this week's is the only important show, because you are building an asset, a resource, a portfolio of episodes that are all important. And I get it. We always put the most emphasis on what's happening this week because it's this week. But that doesn't mean that the episode that you did last year on the same week is any less valuable. If you want to reshare that with your audience, guess what? We're in a binge society, my friend. And if we want to watch old episodes of our favorite shows, we are going to do so and feel no shame about doing that. So there's no reason why you can't serve that type of content to your audience through your podcast if you feel it's better for them in regards to a listener or viewing experience than airing a show that potentially damages your overall quality. You can politely explain to your guest why you are not going to air that episode, but you do not need to air it just because they put up their time and showed up to collaborate. If it's not what you thought was going to happen, if it's not up to your level of quality, if there's too much sales and not enough value, you can easily throw that one away and move on to the next one. But don't feel that you are in a position where you have to air everything just because you said you would, or just because you had that person come and join you for a conversation. Make sure everything lives up to the standards of your podcast. And that way, when you get new people listening or you've got existing listeners continuing to tune in, you're going to keep them captivated and you're going to bring them everything they need and keep them invested in your podcast. So that is going to do it for today's episode of Podcast Theory. This was part 5 of my 5-part series, 5 Things Your Podcast Does Not Need. All 5 episodes are now officially live. Please jump back in the archives. Take in all 5 plus every other episode. A lot of good content here on the show. I want you to consume it. I want you to enjoy it. And I want you to get something from it because this information is designed to help you build a good podcast for your brand. I will be back on the next episode with more explosive podcast insight. Until that happens and our paths cross again, I am Jason Sircone. This has been Podcast Theory. Good talk. I will see you out there.